Mara awoke in the dead of night, her eyes blinking against the fluorescent lights of her hospital room. She had been admitted for observation after a minor surgery, expected to leave in the morning. But as she glanced at the clock, 2:13 a.m., she felt a heavy silence pressing down on her. The hospital seemed wrong. Too quiet. She reached for the call button, but no one responded. Frowning, Mara swung her legs over the bed and carefully stood up. The silence was unsettling, as though the entire floor had been abandoned. She walked to the door and peered out into the dimly lit hallway, noticing how the lights flickered, casting strange shadows against the walls. Her footsteps echoed as she stepped into the corridor. She called out, "Hello," but her voice only bounced back, unanswered. She passed room after room, each one dark and empty, as if the hospital had been evacuated, and she was the last patient left behind. Mara's heart started to race when she reached the nurse's station. Papers were strewn across the desk, and a chair was overturned, as if someone had left in a hurry. A chill ran down her spine. She thought about turning back to her room, but something in her urged her to keep going. She rounded the corner to another hall and froze. A figure stood at the end, dressed in an outdated nurse's uniform from decades past. Her head was tilted down, her hair falling over her face, unmoving. "Excuse me," Mara called out, her voice shaky. I need some help." The figure didn't respond. Instead, it slowly lifted its head, revealing hollow eyes, lifeless and staring, locked on Mara. The nurse's mouth stretched into a twisted smile, and she took a single, deliberate step forward. Mara backed away, her pulse pounding. She turned to run back to her room, but found that the hallway behind her had somehow changed. The walls were peeling, the floors cracked, as if the hospital had aged decades in seconds. She was trapped in a nightmare version of the hospital, one where the line between life and death blurred. Desperate, Mara fled down the hall, glancing back to see the ghostly nurse following, her footsteps silent but relentless. Her head turned to look into each dark room as she passed, hoping to find someone, anyone, that could help her. But each room was filled with empty beds, some with faint impressions in the sheets, as if their occupants had vanished in an instant. She found herself at the elevator and jabbed the button repeatedly. The nurse was getting closer, her twisted smile widening, her fingers reaching out. The elevator doors finally creaked open, and Mara stumbled inside, slamming the button for the lobby. The doors closed just as the nurse's hand nearly reached her. Relieved, Mara slumped against the wall, breathing heavily, but her relief was short-lived. The elevator started descending, and the lights flickered, each time revealing a different version of the nurse in the corner of her eye. She saw her staring, smiling, and in the next flicker, standing closer and closer, each time the lights went off. The elevator stopped with a jolt on the basement level, a place Mara hadn't intended to go. The doors slid open, revealing a pitch-black corridor stretching ahead, dimly lit by flickering, buzzing lights. Just beyond the doors, she saw a sea of faces, patients and staff alike, staring at her with sunken eyes and pale skin. Some of them whispered, their voices a chorus of despair. "You're one of us now," they murmured. Mara felt the cold fingers of fear wrapping around her as she backed up against the elevator wall, frantically hitting buttons to go back up. But the doors didn't close, the elevator seemed frozen in place. And then she felt a cold, bony hand on her shoulder. She turned, heart hammering, and found the nurse standing beside her, smiling. "This is your ward now," the nurse whispered, her voice a hiss of ice. Mara tried to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. The nurse raised a hand and pointed down the basement hall, where a single bed awaited, surrounded by shadowy figures. Her vision blurred as the faces closed in around her, each one a soul trapped in the hospital's walls. And as the darkness swallowed her, Mara realized she would never leave this hospital. The next morning, her bed was empty, her belongings gone, as though she had never been there at all. But late at night, when the hospital is quiet, a nurse can be seen moving through the halls with a strange, twisted smile, checking on an empty bed that holds the faintest impression of where a woman named Mara once lay, still waiting to leave.